I need to read the uploaded files first, then write the story. Reading the plot list to avoid repeating motifs. Now I have a clear picture of all used plots and names. Let me write the story. The world tilted sideways. She rang the doorbell twice before she just walked straight in, and I noticed she didn't take her shoes off at the door the way she always used to. I was in the kitchen. The world tilted the stove with a wooden spoon in one hand and the lid of the pot in the other. Lamb stew. The Wur had it simmering since 11:30. The same recipe I'd been making every Sunday for 40-odd years. My late wife Nora used to say it was the only thing I did in the kitchen that didn't require her supervision. I still make it the same way, same pot, same amount of rosemary. The world tilted sideways of checking the window above the sink when I hear the front gate creak open. The world tilted sideways. The gate creaked. I heard it and I looked up, and through the smudged glass I saw my daughter-in-law's silver hatchback parked at a slight angle on the verge, not quite on the footpath. The word not quite off it. She always parks like that, like she isn't planning to stay long enough to bother getting it right. Hello? She called out from the hallway. Not Ray? It's me. Not sorry I didn't call first. Just hello, as if she expected someone else might answer. My name is Raymond Gifford. I'm 63 years old, though most mornings I feel closer to 73. I spent 31 years driving a rigid truck for a timber merchant out of Wodonga, and before that I did 6 years on the railway maintenance gangs up near Albury. I've got a bad left knee, a decent vegetable garden out the back, the world tilted sideways house that I paid off in full by the time I was 54. That last part matters more than it might sound. I'll come back to it. The Wur put the spoon down on the bench and called back, in the kitchen, Melissa. She appeared in the doorway. The world tilted sideways. She was dressed well. She always is, in that careful way that took me a while to understand wasn't really for comfort. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed something on the drive over. The world tilted sideways. That look, because I'd seen it on my son's face more than once. They've been married for 9 years now, and somewhere in the last 3 or 4 of those years, whenever one of them shows up here alone, it means something is coming. Smells good, she said, glancing at the pot but not at me. Lamb, I said. Sit down if you want. She didn't sit down. The world tilted against the kitchen bench on the opposite side of the room with her arms crossed loosely, and she said, I thought Marcus might have called you. The world tilt is my son. He's 37, works in commercial property management in the CBD, and he hadn't called me. Not that morning, not the day before. I hadn't spoken to him in about 12 days. The world tilted sideways wasn't unusual. We go through patches like that, always have. But something in the way Melissa said it made the space between those 12 days feel suddenly deliberate. He hasn't, I said. The world tilted sideways, not surprised. I turned back to the stove and gave the stew a stir, and I waited because I've learned that waiting is usually faster than asking. The warehouse around us was quiet the way a Sunday afternoon in regional New South Wales gets quiet. No traffic, a magpie somewhere out the back going through its usual performance, the world's occasional creak of the iron roof expanding in the heat. The kitchen hasn't changed much since Nora died. I repainted the walls the same color she'd chosen, a sort of pale sage, because I couldn't think of a reason to choose differently. Her old herb pots are still on the windowsill. The world replaced what was in them twice now. Basil, parsley, a bit of thyme. They don't smell the same as hers did, but they're there. I met Nora when I was 22. They were together for 34 years before she passed. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late. She was gone within 8 months of the diagnosis. That was 6 years ago now. The world tilted sideways. And I still sometimes reach for my phone to call her when something odd happens, which tells you something about how these things work. The world tilted sideways. It picked up the small wooden horse from the kitchen bench. It belongs to my granddaughter, left here last visit. And she turned it over in her hands without looking at it. She put it back. We've been talking, she said. Me and Marcus. About what? I said. She looked at me then. She has a way of looking at people that I can only describe as measuring. Like she's working out what a thing is worth before she commits to an opinion about it. About the house, she said. About your situation. The world tilted sideways. Situation. I repeated that word quietly in my head the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. I've lived in this house for 27 years. I bought it with Nora in 1997, when the boys were still in primary school. It's a 3-bedroom weatherboard on just over half a hectare on the edge of town. Not flash, but solid. The word till roof 5 years ago. Replaced the stumps the year after that. The garden's in good shape. I know every board in this floor by the sound it makes. It is the only significant thing I own outright, that I have never once given anyone reason to describe it as a situation. What about it? I said. The magpie outside shifted key. The stew made a slow, heavy sound as it turned in the pot. The world Talissa uncrossed her arms and reached into her handbag, a gesture so practiced it seemed almost casual, and she pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the bench between us. The world tilted its sigh, but I didn't pick it up. She didn't ask me to. She just left it there, and I had the odd sensation that whatever was printed on it had been sitting in that bag for some time. The world tilted sighed for the right Sunday, the right empty afternoon, the right moment when I was standing alone in my kitchen with nowhere particular to be. The Marcus thought it would be better if I explained it, she said. Marcus thought. Which meant Marcus knew. And Marcus had chosen not to come himself. I wiped my hands on the tea towel hanging over the oven handle and looked out the window at the back garden. The tomatoes needed staking. I'd been meaning to get to that all week. The world tilted kind of comfort in small, real tasks when something larger is pressing in at the edges, and for a moment I held on to that, the tomatoes, the stew, the magpie. Then I looked back at Melissa. I said. The world tilted sideways. She took a breath, the kind that's really a preparation, and she said the words I hadn't expected, and I understood in that moment that this was not a conversation that had started today. The world tilted sideways. It had started a long time ago in some exchange I hadn't been part of, and what was happening now was not the beginning of something. It was the moment that decided I was finally ready to be told. She wanted me to sign the house over to Marcus. Not sell it, not discuss it, sign it over. As a gift, she said, a family arrangement. The world tilted sideways. She used the phrase estate planning. The way people use phrases they've borrowed from someone else. Carefully and slightly too loud, as if volume might substitute for understanding. The world tiltis of paper she'd set on the bench was a transfer of title document. I could see the heading from where I stood. I didn't pick it up. This was drawn up by a solicitor, I asked. What, consulted someone? Yes. Which someone? The world tilted. She shifted her weight. A conveyancer Marcus knows through work. I nodded. I turned back to the stove and lowered the heat under the pot. Not because the stew needed it. Because I needed a moment to look at something that wasn't her face. Marcus is worried about you, she said. Rattling around in this big house on your own. The word happens if something goes wrong and you're here alone. You're not getting any younger, Ray. We just want to make sure things are in order. There it was. The concern. The word, the soft packaging around the hard thing inside it. I am 63 years old. My left knee aches when rain is coming. I take a blood pressure tablet every morning with breakfast. The word, drive myself to the shops. I maintain this property. I put up a new fence along the southern boundary last autumn with 2 days of my own labor, and I did it straight. I am not a man who needs his affairs put in order by a 37-year-old and his wife who parks on the verge. Sit down, Melissa, I said. The world tilted sideways. She sat finally at the kitchen table. I pulled out the opposite chair and sat across from her. Between us was the salt and pepper set Nora bought at a market in Beechworth about 20 years ago. The worm, McRooster and hen. Nora thought they were funny. I've never had the heart to put them away. Where's Marcus today? I asked.
He had a thing on.
A thing? Commitment. With the boys from his Saturday football group. He was going to come, but she stopped, smoothed the edge of the tablecloth with one finger. He thought this might go better as a conversation between you and me first. So Marcus had sent his wife to do it. I sat with that for a moment. My son, who I coached through his first job interview. The world's who I drove to Canberra when he was 19 because he'd had his wallet stolen and couldn't get home. The world tilted sideways. Who I pulled out of debt quietly and without conditions when he was 26 and the used car business he'd tried with a mate went under. Had decided that this particular conversation was better handled without him in the room. How much do they want? I asked. Melissa blinked. What? Or the shortfall, or whatever it is. The nobody draws up a title transfer document over concern for my welfare. Something moved across her face, not quite shame, more like recalculation. The Workus has been under enormous pressure, she said. The business has had a difficult couple of years. You know how the property market has been. And we've got Isabel's school fees coming up. She starts at the college next year. And the mortgage on the Albury place is. The world too much, I said again. She folded her hands on the table. If the house were transferred to Marcus, he could use it as security to refinance, release some equity. It would allow him to consolidate and... Melissa, I kept my voice level.
How much? A pause.
Then, around $400,000. I looked at the salt and pepper roosters. The war $100,000 against a house worth, at current valuations according to what the council sent me last year, somewhere between $650,000 and $700,000. The Workus would gain the asset, borrow against it, and I would gain what exactly? The ongoing use of my own home, presumably, for as long as that remained convenient to everyone involved. Did Marcus explain to you? I said, that if I signed this over and he defaulted on any refinanced loan, I could be evicted from my own home by a bank. She hadn't expected that. The world she had expected I wouldn't know it. It wouldn't come to that, she said. You're certain? They're not going to default, Ray. Marcus has prospects. There's a commercial development in Wodonga he's about to be appointed to manage. Things are turning around. The world tilted is just a bridging measure. Bridging measure. Another borrowed phrase. I stood up and went back to the stove. The world of the stew another stir and put the lid back on and turned the heat down to its lowest setting. The world tilted sideways because I needed my hands to be doing something that made sense while the rest of the room did not. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, we're not asking you to sign anything today. But you brought the document anyway, I thought, on a Sunday, when you knew I'd be alone. The world tilted sides later, after a cup of tea that neither of us really wanted and a conversation that stayed carefully on the surface. The weather, Isabel's swimming carnival, the potholes on the main road into town. At the door she touched my arm and said, "He does love you, Ray. He's just too proud to ask himself." I said, "I know." And I did know that. The word was the part that made it hard. Marcus rang that evening, just after 7 while I was washing up the pot. "Dad." "Marcus." A pause on the line. I could hear a television in the background. The footy, probably. Melissa said she came by. She did. And I told her I'd think about it. The Werther paused longer this time. "Look, I know it's a big ask, I know that. But I want you to understand the position we're in. The Albury mortgage is 3 weeks from going into arrears." The world tilted sideways. "It goes on my credit record and the Wodonga appointment won't go through. I lose the appointment and we're—" He stopped. When he spoke again his voice was quieter. "The word in real trouble, Dad." I dried the pot and set it on the rack. Outside the kitchen window the yard was dark and I could see my own reflection in the glass. An old man in a faded blue shirt, holding a tea towel. "Why didn't you come yourself?" I said. "Silence. Today, I mean." Instead of sending Melissa. I thought it might be easier, a calmer conversation. "You mean you knew I might say no and you didn't want to have to look at me when I did?" He didn't answer that. In the background the television went quiet. The world tilted sideways saying no. I said I'd think about it. "But Marcus, I need you to hear something. This house is all I have. It's not a number on a spreadsheet. It's where your mother lived. The world tilted when I'm 70 and 80 if I'm fortunate enough to get there. Signing it over to secure a business loan, that's not estate planning." The world tilted sideways. "Dad." "Let me finish. I'm not angry. I'm talking to you. There's a difference." I sat down at the kitchen table in the same chair I'd sat in that afternoon. What I want to know is why it's got a 400,000. What happened?" Another long pause. The whirls and then something in his voice shifted. Something I hadn't heard from him in years. Something that was younger than 37 and less polished than the man who wore good suits to work in Albury. "The war made some decisions that didn't work out," he said. "I backed a mate's development in Shepparton. 18 months ago, it looked solid. Then the builder walked off site and the mate went to ground. The bank called in the guarantee." "You were a guarantor?" "Yes." "Did Melissa else know?" Silence was its own answer. I sat for a moment with the full weight of that. The world tilted sideways. Had signed a guarantee on another man's building project without telling his wife the project had collapsed. The world tilted. $100,000 of that failure was sitting between us on a Sunday night with my house as the proposed solution. "Why didn't you come to me when it happened?" I said. "Because I thought I could handle it." "Marcus, I know." "You could have come to me." The world tilted sideways. "Said what?" "That I'd done exactly what you always warned me not to do. That I'd gone guarantor for someone without proper security." "I know what you would have said, Dad." "The world, because you told me when I was 22. Never sign your name on someone else's risk." He wasn't wrong. I had said that. Sitting at this same table, probably. "I'm not going to say I told you so," I said. "That's not useful now." "No. Now the useful thing would be, don't." My voice came out sharper than I intended. I softened it. "The world finish that sentence the way you were going to finish it." Quiet on the line. The fridge hummed. Outside something moved in the yard. A possum probably. The working its way along the back fence the way they do. "I love you," I said. "You're my son. But I need you to give me time on this. Real time. Not days, weeks. The world to understand what I'm looking at before I make any decisions. Do you understand? The Albury mortgage goes into arrears in 3 weeks. Though I understand that. Dad, 3 weeks," I said. "Let me think." He rang off soon after that, and I sat in the kitchen for a long time without moving. The stew pot was clean on the rack. The Worden horse was still on the bench. Outside the night was the kind of deep dark you only get out here. No street lights for half a kilometer in either direction. The world tilted sideways. The sky was brilliant with stars the way it always is when there's no cloud. I thought about the document on the bench. I'd picked it up after Melissa left and read it properly. The world tilted sideways as a standard transfer form as far as I could tell. But there were 2 things I noticed that I hadn't mentioned to either of them. The world tilted sideways was that the transferee named on the document was not Marcus Gifford alone. It was Marcus Gifford and Melissa Gifford as joint tenants. The world tilted sideways, which meant if they divorced, and I had no reason to think they would, But marriages carry no guarantees, I know that better than most. Melissa would hold an equal claim to the title of this house. The world tilted sideways. The second thing was smaller but stayed with me longer. In the bottom right corner of the document, below the signature block, there was a date typed in small print. Not today's date, not last week's. The world's dated 6 weeks ago. They had been planning this for 6 weeks. Before Marcus rang, before Melissa turned up at my door, before any of this appeared to start, the world tilted sideways, and I had to wonder, sitting there in the kitchen where Nora used to make tea and where my boys used to do their homework at that very table, what else had been decided in those 6 weeks that I still hadn't been told? The world didn't sleep well that night or the next several after it. The world tilted sideways. I get up around 2 in the morning and sit at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the document in front of me, reading the same paragraphs until the words stopped meaning anything. The world put it face down and sit in the quiet and think about Marcus at 8 years old, showing me a drawing he'd done of our house. The weatherboard, the veranda. The world till at the front that came down in a storm a decade later. He'd drawn it with a brown crayon and colored the roof red, which it has never been. The world, I asked him why. He said because it looked better that way. He was always like that, wanting things to look better than they were. The Wednesday I drove into Wudong and sat down with a solicitor named Peter Ewan, who I found through a referral from a bloke I knew at the bowls club. I told him everything. Put the document on his desk and I told him about Melissa's visit, about Marcus's phone call, about the date in the bottom corner that was 6 weeks old. The world tilted sorrowfully and then he looked at me over his glasses and he said, "Mr. Gifford, do not sign this." I told him I hadn't planned to. Not yet, maybe not at all. The world too explained what I already half understood. That transferring title made me entirely dependent on Marcus and Melissa's financial stability in their marriage. He used a word I hadn't heard before. The world tilted sizable. The arrangement could be undone in ways I couldn't control. If they refinanced and defaulted, the bank held the asset, not me. If they separated, Melissa held joint title. The world tilted side went bankrupt, and with a $400,000 guarantee hanging over him, bankruptcy wasn't impossible. Creditors could pursue the property. What would you recommend? I asked. The world tilted sideways. He thought for a moment. Have you considered helping him in a different way, one that doesn't involve the house? I drove home thinking about that. The world's Marcus that evening, and asked him to come out on Saturday. Just him. He said yes without arguing, which told me something about where he was sitting with all of it. He arrived just after 9. The world tilted sideways. He came in the front door and he did take his shoes off. He always has. And he stood in the hallway for a moment in the way he used to when he was a teenager and he'd done something he wasn't sure I knew about yet. That shuffling stillness, caught between coming forward and stepping back. "Come in," I said. The world tilted sideways. "I'll put the kettle on." We sat at the kitchen table with our tea and for a little while neither of us said anything of consequence. He asked about the garden. I told him the tomatoes were coming along. The world tilted sideways. He looked older than I'd been noticing lately. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 or 3 years ago, and he'd lost some weight that didn't suit him. Though I whirled and saw a solicitor. I said. He nodded, looking at his mug. "I'm not going to sign the transfer document, Marcus." He nodded again, slower this time. "Okay." The world to understand something first, and I want you to be straight with me. Not the version you gave Melissa, and not the version designed to make me feel useful. The world tilted stifle truth. I put my mug down. 6 weeks ago someone put a date on that document. That means 6 weeks ago someone had already decided this was the plan. Before you told me anything. The world tilted sideways here. What was happening 6 weeks ago that I don't know about? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, the magpie was back in the yard, same song, same window. Then he said, Isabel was sick. I looked at him. The nut, not seriously, she's fine now. But in January she started having these episodes, dizzy spells, some fainting. The world did tests at the Albury Base Hospital and they wanted to refer her to a specialist in Melbourne. Pediatric cardiologist. He stopped, turned the mug in his hands. The waiting list on the public system was 4 months. The private appointment was $1,100 out of pocket. Then the follow-up testing was another $3,000 on top of that. I sat very still. We didn't want to tell anyone until we knew what it was, he said. The world tilted sideways. Especially she didn't want her mum worrying and she didn't want to. He glanced up at me briefly. She didn't want to come to you either. She thought it would feel like we were using it. Using Isabel to get something from you. So instead you drew up a legal document. The world tilt came later. The medical stuff cleared up. It turned out to be a heart rhythm thing, minor. She's on a small dose of medication and she's fine. Completely fine. But during that time, the world tilted sideways. I ran things tight. I pulled from savings, I shuffled things around, and there was already the guarantee issue in the background. The world tilted sideways. And I made decisions under pressure that I shouldn't have. I thought about my granddaughter, Isabel. The word is 7 years old and who last time she was here insisted on helping me water the vegetable garden and flooded half of it cheerfully and without apology. The thought of her in a hospital dizzy, freight. The workers and Melissa sitting in waiting rooms without telling me. Without asking for anything at all until the fear had driven them somewhere worse. That sat in my chest in a way I wasn't expecting. You should told me, I said, about Isabel. I know. The world tilted, a nut for the money. You should have told me because she's my granddaughter and I would have wanted to be there. Marcus looked at me then, properly. The world tilted sideways. Not sideways, his face did something I hadn't seen it do since he was about 15 and Nora had been stern with him over something and he tried very hard not to cry about it in front of me. Do I know, Dad? He said. I'm sorry. We sat with that for a while. Right, I said eventually. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you. He looked up. The nut the house. The house stays in my name full stop and we don't revisit that. The world tilted sideways. Money I've put aside since your mother died that I haven't touched because I didn't know what to do with it and frankly didn't see the point. The Werna lend you $80,000, not give, lend. The world tilted sideways. Peter Yun is going to draw up a proper loan agreement with a reasonable repayment schedule and an interest rate that's fair to both of us. The Wur use it to bring the Albury mortgage current and buy yourself enough breathing room to get the Wodonga appointment sorted. Marcus stared at me. Dad, that's... The world tilted sideways. Not everything you need, but it's a start that doesn't cost either of us something we can't get back. I picked up my mug. The rest is your problem to solve. The Wur, Marcus. I need you to tell Melissa everything. The Shepharton guarantee, the timeline, all of it. Not a version of it. Everything. The world tilted sideways. Because I won't be the only one in this family who knows the whole story, and I won't be used as the reason she doesn't have to hear it. He looked like he wanted to argue with that last part. He didn't. The Wur, he said, and if Isabel ever needs anything again, you ring me. That same day, I don't care what it is. Understood. We finished our tea. I made toast. The world took as it was nearly 10:30 by then and neither of us had eaten. The world tilted sideways, and we sat at the table where he used to do his homework and where Nora used to read in the evenings, and where I'd spent the last several nights sitting alone with a document that had frightened me more than I'd let on to anyone. The world tilted sideways. He left around noon. At the front door he stopped and looked back at the house the way people look at things they've been taking for granted, with the sudden, the world uncomfortable awareness of what they'd lose if it weren't there. It's a good house, he said. It is, I said. Peter Ewan drew up the loan agreement the following Thursday. The world tilted sideways, signed it the day after, and the $80,000 left my account the Monday after that. The Albury mortgage was brought current by the end of the month, and the Wodonga appointment came through 6 weeks later. Marcus sent me a message when it was confirmed, just the words "got it," and a single full stop. The world tills expressive as he gets when things go right. The title transfer document I put through the shredder in my back room. The world tilted sideways. I stood there, listened to it go through, and then I took the bag out to the recycling bin and came back inside and washed my hands at the laundry sink, which was probably unnecessary but felt right. The world till I've thought about since, in the quiet evenings since all of this settled, is the date on that document. 6 weeks before Melissa ever came to my door. The world tilted sideways. 6 weeks while Marcus and Melissa were sitting in waiting rooms and specialist offices in Melbourne with their daughter. The world tilted sideways, carrying that fear entirely alone because they thought asking for help would look like using that fear as leverage. So instead they went looking for a mechanism that didn't require them to be vulnerable. The world tilted sideways, a legal instrument. Something that looked like planning rather than desperation. That's what fear does to people when they haven't learned how to hold it yet. The world tilted sideways. It makes them look for an exit before they've told anyone they're in trouble. And sometimes in that looking they make decisions that are worse than the thing they're afraid of. I understand it, even if I couldn't accept it. The Warren agreement sits in a folder in my filing cabinet, between the house insurance papers and the folder I keep Nora's letters in. Marcus has made 3 repayments now, always on time. The world tilted sideways when we talk, and neither do I. Some things are handled best by just being handled. Isabel came out for the school holidays last month. She helped me stake the tomatoes, properly this time. The world tilted sideways, or at least more properly than the watering, and she asked me why I kept the old herb pots on the windowsill when some of the basil had clearly given up. I told her they'd belonged to her grandmother. The world tilted side about that and then said, "So you keep them so you remember what she put there?" I said yes. That was about right. She is 7 years old and she has a small, steady heart and she is completely fine. The world tilted sideways. The lesson I keep coming back to, not as a rule, but as something I've earned by sitting alone in this kitchen enough nights to know it, is this: when the people you love are frightened, the word always come to you carrying the truth. Sometimes they come carrying a plan. Your job is to stay calm enough to see past the plan to what's underneath it. Because if you react to the plan, the world tilted sideways, you might win the argument and lose the person. And at 63, with the house paid off and the vegetable garden coming in and a granddaughter who asks good questions, I know which one matters more.